The late autumn rain painted streaks across the floor-to-ceiling windows of Margaret Thorne's corner office on the 38th floor of Century City's most prestigious law firm. Angelina Jolie sat perfectly still in a sleek leather chair, her fingers intertwined in her lap as she watched her longtime attorney pace back and forth across the imported Italian marble floors. "They're going for blood this time, Angie," Margaret said, her Louboutins clicking with each step. "The allegations they're making, they're not just attacking your reputation. They're trying to destroy everything you've built." Angelina drew in a measured breath, her composure a carefully constructed facade that had served her well through decades in the public eye. "Show me," she said simply. Margaret hesitated for a fraction of a second before sliding a thick manila folder across her desk. The documents inside detailed a coordinated attack on Angelina's humanitarian foundation, suggesting misappropriated funds and questionable dealings with international organizations. It was a masterfully crafted web of half-truths and manipulated facts, designed to cast shadows on 20 years of charitable work. "We need to hit back hard," Margaret declared, her voice taking on the sharp edge that had earned her the nickname the surgeon in legal circles. "I've already drafted cease and desist letters to 12 major publications. We can file defamation suits in multiple jurisdictions by morning." Angelina's dark eyes moved methodically across the pages, absorbing every detail. Her foundation had built schools in war-torn regions, established medical clinics in refugee camps, and created sustainable development programs in communities devastated by natural disasters. Now, someone wanted to paint it all as an elaborate tax scheme and publicity stunt. "Who's behind this?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Margaret's lips tightened into a thin line. "Our sources point to Carlton Ross." The name hung in the air like smoke. Carlton Ross, media mogul, political kingmaker, and a man who had never forgiven Angelina for publicly opposing his attempt to buy out a major humanitarian organization 3 years ago. She had rallied other celebrities and influential figures against his takeover, costing him millions and, more importantly, his pride. "He's using shell companies and intermediaries," Margaret continued, "but the pattern is clear. This is personal for him." Angelina closed the folder and placed it back on the desk with deliberate care. "What's your proposed strategy?" Margaret's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. "We go nuclear. I've got dirt on Ross that would make headlines for months. His offshore accounts, his private islands, the real reason his last marriage ended. We leak it strategically, piece by piece, while simultaneously filing lawsuits against his media outlets. We can tie him up in litigation for years. And the collateral damage? Unavoidable in a war like this. Some of his employees might lose their jobs when we're done. A few smaller publications might go under. His children might face some public embarrassment." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "That's the price of victory." Angelina stood and walked to the window, watching the rain transform the city lights into blurred watercolors. Her reflection stared back at her, overlaid against the storm-darkened sky. She thought of the faces she'd seen in refugee camps, of children who had taught her that true strength often meant choosing not to strike back, even when you could. "No," she said quietly. "I'm sorry. We're not going to destroy innocent people to win this fight." Angelina turned back to face her lawyer of 15 years. "There has to be another way." Margaret's expression hardened. "This isn't a movie, Angie. There's no script where everyone gets a happy ending. Ross is coming for everything you've built, everything you care about. If we don't hit back harder than he's hitting us, you'll lose it all. Then maybe that's a price I'm willing to pay." Angelina's voice was soft but unmistakably firm. "My foundation was built on helping people, not hurting them. I won't defend it by becoming everything I've fought against." "Don't be naive." Margaret's composure cracked, her voice rising. "This is the real world. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire." "No." Angelina shook her head. "That's where you're wrong. Fighting fire with fire just leaves everything burned to the ground. I won't do it." The silence that followed was heavy with 15 years of trust beginning to unravel. Margaret slumped into her chair, suddenly looking tired. "Then I don't know if I can help you anymore." "What do you mean?" "I mean..." Margaret picked up a pen and began turning it over in her hands. "I've built my career on winning at all costs. It's what I do. It's who I am. If you want to fight this battle with one hand tied behind your back, I'm not the right person for that job." Angelina felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Are you saying you want to withdraw as my counsel?" "I'm saying I think you should find someone whose ethical constraints align better with yours." Margaret wouldn't meet her eyes. "Someone who's willing to lose the right way instead of winning the wrong way." Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the office in harsh white light for a moment. Angelina stood very still, feeling the weight of the moment. She had come here expecting to begin a fight against Carlton Ross. Instead, she found herself losing the one person she had trusted to stand beside her in every legal battle for the past decade and a half. "I see," she said finally. "Then I suppose this is goodbye." "Angie." Margaret started to rise, but Angelina was already moving toward the door, her steps measured and deliberate. "Send me the withdrawal paperwork in the morning. I'll have it signed and returned by noon." Her hand paused on the doorknob. "Thank you for everything, Margaret. I mean that." She stepped out into the hallway before her longtime friend and attorney could respond. As the heavy door clicked shut behind her, Angelina allowed herself a moment to lean against the wall, hidden from view by a massive potted fern. Her phone buzzed in her purse, undoubtedly more news about Ross's attacks. She had just lost her most powerful ally, and tomorrow the world would know it. The vultures would smell blood in the water. But as she straightened her spine and walked toward the elevator, Angelina felt something alongside the fear and uncertainty, a quiet, steely resolve. She would find another way to fight this battle, one that wouldn't require her to sacrifice her principles. She had to. Because if Carlton Ross succeeded in destroying her foundation, thousands of people around the world would suffer. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. As Angelina stepped inside, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the polished brass walls. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had just lost a crucial battle but was already planning how to win the war. The only question was, where would she find someone willing to fight it her way? The elevator began its descent, and somewhere in the storm-dark city, the answer waited to be found. The news of Margaret Thorne's withdrawal spread through legal circles like wildfire. By morning, Angelina's phone was filled with messages from high-powered attorneys eager to represent her. Their pitches varied in tone but shared a common thread: promises of aggressive counterattacks and scorched-earth litigation strategies. Exactly what she didn't want. She sat in her home office, surrounded by morning light and the gentle sounds of wind rustling through the garden outside. On her desk lay the latest headlines: Jolie Foundation under investigation, humanitarian hero or clever fraud? Each one felt like a personal betrayal, not just of her but of every person her foundation had helped. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting her assistant with the morning schedule. Instead, her oldest son Maddox entered, his face bearing the concerned expression she'd grown familiar with over the past week. At 23, he had grown into a thoughtful young man who seemed to carry the weight of his family's challenges on his shoulders. "Mom, have you seen this?" He held up his tablet, displaying an article that made her heart sink. Carlton Ross's media empire had begun publishing interviews with former employees of her foundation, their stories carefully edited to paint a picture of mismanagement and questionable practices. "Yes," she said quietly. "I saw it this morning." Maddox sat down across from her. "These people, I know them. Sarah Chen ran our Southeast Asia programs for years. James Cooper helped set up the medical clinics in Sudan. They would never say these things about the foundation." "No, they wouldn't." Angelina's voice was tight with controlled anger. Ross's people must have manipulated their interviews, taken things out of context, but proving that without hurting Sarah and James in the process. She trailed off, running a hand through her hair in frustration. What did the new lawyers say? They all want to sue everyone in sight. She gestured at the stack of messages on her desk. One suggested we counterleak damaging information about the interviewed employees to discredit them. Another wanted to file RICO charges against Ross's entire organization. That's not you, Maddox said simply. No, it's not. She smiled faintly at her son. But sometimes I wonder if Margaret was right. Maybe I'm being naive. Actually. Maddox hesitated, then pulled out his phone. I might have something. Remember last summer when I interned at that small human rights law firm? Angelina nodded. It had been his first legal internship, chosen despite offers from more prestigious firms. Well, there was this lawyer there, Diana Chen. No relation to Sarah, he added quickly. She handled these incredibly complex international cases, but her approach was different. She always found ways to resolve conflicts that helped everyone involved. Even the opponents sometimes ended up better off. He pulled up a website on his phone and handed it to her. The firm was modest by Los Angeles standards, Chen and Associates, specializing in international human rights law and conflict resolution. Diana Chen's biography showed a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and an impressive record of handling sensitive cases involving NGOs and international organizations. She's brilliant, Mom. And she doesn't believe in destroying people to win cases. Before Angelina could respond, her assistant hurried in. Ms. Jolie, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see. She turned on the office television, where Carlton Ross himself was giving a press conference. These allegations are just the beginning, Ross was saying, his silver hair perfectly styled and his expression grave. We have evidence suggesting that the Jolie Foundation has been operating as a front for tax evasion and personal profit. I believe the public deserves to know the truth about where their charitable donations are really going. Angelina watched in silence as Ross continued his performance, each word carefully chosen to erode 2 decades of humanitarian work. When he finished, she turned to her son. Call Diana Chen, she said. See if she'll meet with me today. 3 hours later, Angelina sat in a surprisingly comfortable chair in Diana Chen's modest office. The space was warm and inviting, with walls lined with photos of communities around the world, places where Diana had presumably worked. It was a stark contrast to Margaret's sleek, power-projecting domain. Ms. Jolie, Diana said, her voice carrying a gentle authority that immediately commanded attention. Your son told me about your situation. Before we discuss anything else, I'd like to know, what does winning look like to you? The question caught Angelina off guard. Every other lawyer had launched straight into strategy and tactics. I want to protect my foundation's work, she began, then paused, considering. But more than that, I want to protect the people, both the communities we serve and the dedicated people who make our work possible. I won't win by destroying others. Diana nodded, making a small note on her pad. Even if those others are trying to destroy you? Especially then. Angelina leaned forward. Otherwise, what's the point of all our humanitarian work? A small smile touched Diana's lips. Tell me about Carlton Ross. Not the public figure, the man. What drives him? Power, Angelina started to say, then stopped herself. No, that's too simple. Recognition, maybe. 3 years ago, when he tried to buy Global Aid Network, he talked about leaving a legacy. He wanted to be remembered as someone who changed the world. Interesting. Diana set down her pen. You know, in my experience, people who want to change the world usually believe they're the heroes of the story. Even when they're acting like villains. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe we don't need to destroy Carlton Ross. Maybe we need to help him find a better way to build his legacy. Diana's eyes sparkled with intelligence. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. I'll take your case, Ms. Jolie, but I work differently than most lawyers you've known. We're going to need to dig deep, not just into Ross's actions, but into the root causes of this conflict. And if we can't find a peaceful solution? Then we fight, but we fight smart, not dirty. We use truth as our weapon, not destruction. Diana reached for a thick folder on her desk. Now, let's talk about these former employee interviews. I have some ideas about how we might help them tell their real stories without putting them at risk. As they began to work, Angelina felt something she hadn't expected, hope. But in the back of her mind, a nagging worry remained. Could they really find a peaceful solution before Ross's campaign destroyed everything she had built? And what would happen when Margaret inevitably joined Ross's legal team, armed with 15 years of intimate knowledge about Angelina and her foundation? The worst news came on a sunny Tuesday morning. Angelina was in Diana Chen's office, reviewing their progress on untangling Ross's network of shell companies, when her phone lit up with urgent messages. Margaret Thorne had officially joined Carlton Ross's legal team. "Well," Diana said, studying Angelina's face as she absorbed the news, "I can't say I'm surprised. Ross probably offered her a partnership and a corner office in his new legal division." Angelina set down her phone with careful precision. She knows everything about the foundation. 15 years of strategy discussions, confidential information, private conversations. Most of which is protected by attorney-client privilege, Diana reminded her gently. "You really think that will stop them?" Angelina stood and walked to the window, watching a hummingbird dart between the flowers in Diana's small garden. Ross has already shown he's willing to twist the truth. Now he has someone who knows where all the bodies are buried. Interesting choice of words. Diana's voice took on the thoughtful tone that Angelina had come to recognize as a prelude to insight. "You say Margaret knows where the bodies are buried, but in 3 weeks of reviewing your foundation's records, I haven't found any bodies. What I've found is 2 decades of meticulously documented humanitarian work, transparent financial records, and careful attention to international aid regulations. That won't matter if they can make people believe otherwise. Actually, it matters more than you think." Diana pulled out a thick folder. "While you've been worried about Margaret joining Ross, our team has been making real progress. Take a look at this." The folder contained affidavits from dozens of people whose lives had been touched by the Jolie Foundation. A Syrian refugee who now ran a successful business thanks to a microfinance program. A Cambodian doctor whose medical education had been funded by the foundation. A Sudanese community leader whose village had been transformed by a sustainable agriculture project. "These are beautiful stories," Angelina said, "but Ross's media empire won't publish them." "They don't have to." Diana smiled. "Because Ross isn't the only one who's been making moves. Sarah Chen and James Cooper, the former employees whose interviews were manipulated? They've agreed to go on record about how their words were twisted. And they're not alone." She pressed a button on her desk phone. "Send them in, please." The door opened, and Angelina's breath caught. Into the office walked 3 familiar faces: Robert Martinez, her foundation's former financial director, Dr. Emily Wong, who had overseen medical programs in Southeast Asia, and Thomas Kruma, a respected African diplomat who had worked closely with the foundation. "We're not going to let them destroy what we built," Robert said simply. Dr. Wong stepped forward. "When we saw what Ross's people did to Sarah and James's interviews, we knew we had to act. We've all kept detailed records over the years. Records that show not just the foundation's successes," Thomas added, his deep voice carrying the weight of authority, "but also its challenges, its learning processes, and most importantly, its unwavering commitment to ethical operations." Angelina felt tears threatening to form but held them back. "You're all taking a huge risk. Ross is powerful, and he can be vindictive." "That's exactly why we're here," Robert replied. "Someone needs to stand up to people like him." show that there's more power in truth than in fear. Diana stood and walked to a large whiteboard covered in flowcharts and connections. With their help, we've mapped out Ross's entire campaign against you. The shell companies, the manipulated interviews, the coordinated media attacks, it's all documented. But more importantly, we've found something interesting about Ross himself. She pointed to a section of the chart. 6 months ago, Ross's youngest daughter, Sarah, left his company to work for a small non-profit in East Africa. According to our sources, it caused a major rift between them. She told him his pursuit of profit at any cost was destroying people's lives. Sarah Ross, Angelina said slowly. I met her once at a fundraiser. She seemed different from her father. Very different, Diana confirmed. And based on what we've uncovered, this whole campaign against your foundation started shortly after their falling out. I don't think that's a coincidence. Before she could elaborate, Angelina's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Maddox. Mom, he said without preamble, you need to see the news right now. Diana turned on the office television. Margaret Thorne stood at a podium, her red blazer bright against the blue backdrop of Ross Media headquarters. But something was off about her usual confident demeanor. As Mr. Ross's new chief legal counsel, she was saying, I can confirm that we have evidence of serious irregularities in the Jolie Foundation's operations. We will be filing formal complaints with. She paused, her eyes flickering to something off-camera. With multiple regulatory agencies this week. Angelina watched her former friend closely. After 15 years, she could read Margaret's tells. The slight tension in her jaw, the way her left hand kept straying to her collar, Margaret was uncomfortable. No, more than that. She was uncertain. There, Diana said softly. Did you see it? See what? When she mentioned the evidence. She blinked 3 times rapidly. Classic sign of someone saying something they don't fully believe. Diana turned to face Angelina. I think it's time we move to the next phase of our strategy. Which is, we're going to offer Carlton Ross something he wants more than your destruction. Diana's eyes gleamed. A chance to repair his relationship with his daughter and build a real legacy. But first, she looked at the former foundation employees gathered in her office. We need to show him what real power looks like. Not the power to destroy, but the power to transform lives. As they began to plan their next moves, Angelina felt the momentum shifting. But experience had taught her that wounded predators were often the most dangerous. Ross wouldn't go down without a fight, and Margaret knew things that even these loyal former employees didn't. The real battle was just beginning, and its outcome would depend not on who could hit hardest, but on who could hold on to their humanity in the face of all-out war. The Ross Media Building cast a long shadow across the plaza as Angelina walked through its revolving doors, Diana chin close beside her. Security guards straightened at their approach, hands moving to earpieces as they received instructions on how to handle this unexpected visit. Ms. Jolie, a sleek corporate liaison, intercepted them at the lobby desk. Mr. Ross isn't taking visitors today. Tell him it's about Sarah, Angelina said quietly. The name worked like a key turning in a lock. Within minutes, they were ascending to the penthouse floor. Carlton Ross's office suite occupied the entire top floor, its decor a testament to power and success. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Los Angeles, and the walls were adorned with photos of Ross shaking hands with presidents and prime ministers. But Angelina's attention was drawn to a smaller photo on his desk, partially hidden behind a stack of papers, Ross with a much younger Sarah, both smiling at a beach somewhere. Ross himself stood with his back to them, staring out at the city he'd spent decades conquering. You have exactly 3 minutes to explain why you're here before I have security remove you. Because in about an hour, Diana said, setting her briefcase on his desk, every major news outlet except yours will be running a story that could either destroy your relationship with your daughter forever or help heal it. The choice is yours. That got his attention. Ross turned, his face a mask of practiced neutrality that didn't quite hide his concern. What are you talking about? We know why you started this campaign against my foundation, Angelina said. It wasn't about the failed global aid network takeover. It was about Sarah. A muscle twitched in Ross's jaw. Before he could respond, the office door opened and Margaret Thorne strode in, stopping short when she saw who was there. What are they doing here? She demanded. Showing Mr. Ross something he needs to see, Diana replied, pulling out a tablet. This is footage from one of our medical clinics in Tanzania. The same clinic where Sarah Ross has been working for the past 6 months. She pressed play. The video showed Sarah, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, working alongside local medical staff. She was explaining a new maternal health program to a group of community leaders, her face alight with purpose. Your daughter is doing remarkable work, Angelina said softly. The clinic's mortality rates have dropped 30% since she implemented her outreach program. Turn it off, Ross said, but his eyes remained fixed on the image of his daughter. She's not just some rebellious rich kid playing at charity, Diana continued, ignoring his command. She's actually making a difference. The kind of difference you once wanted to make with Global Aid Network. Margaret stepped forward. Whatever game you're playing. No games, Angelina interrupted. Just truth. The same truth you've been struggling with, Margaret. I saw it in your press conference yesterday. Margaret's confident facade cracked slightly. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Angelina met her former friend's eyes. You've spent the last week reviewing our foundation's records, looking for ammunition to use against us. What did you find? Not what Ross promised you, I'm betting. A tense silence filled the room. Margaret's gaze flickered to Ross, then back to Angelina. The irregularities you mentioned in your press conference, Diana said, her voice gentle but firm. They don't exist, do they? That's why you looked so uncomfortable making those claims. We have evidence, Margaret began, but her voice lacked conviction. No, Ross cut in sharply. We have implications and innuendos. Nothing that would stand up in court. He turned to Margaret. Isn't that what you've been trying to tell me for the past 2 days? Margaret's shoulders sagged slightly. The foundation's records are clean, Carlton. Cleaner than most corporate accounts I've seen. If we file those complaints we discussed, we'll be the ones facing legal consequences for false allegations. Ross sank into his chair, looking suddenly older. And Sarah? What does she have to do with this? In 1 hour, Diana explained, those news outlets will run stories about Sarah's work in Tanzania. About how she's implementing innovative programs that are saving lives. They'll also reveal how her father, rather than supporting her humanitarian work, launched a campaign to destroy similar efforts by attacking the Jolie Foundation. You're blackmailing me, Ross said, but the usual fire was missing from his voice. No, Angelina stepped closer to his desk. We're offering you a choice. You can continue this fight, knowing it will permanently destroy any chance of reconciling with your daughter. Or... She glanced at Diana, who nodded encouragingly. Or, Diana picked up, you can help us create something unprecedented. A partnership between Ross Media's resources and the Jolie Foundation's humanitarian expertise. Imagine the good we could do together. Imagine the legacy you could build, not as the man who tried to destroy a humanitarian foundation, but as the one who helped transform global aid work. And Sarah? Ross asked quietly. Would see that her father finally understands what she's been trying to tell him, Angelina answered. That real power comes from helping others, not hurting them. Ross stood and walked back to the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, he turned around. Margaret, what's your legal opinion on this? Margaret straightened, professionalism warring with conscience on her face. Legally? A partnership would benefit both parties. Ross Media's shareholders would appreciate the positive PR, and... She paused, then continued more softly, and it would be the right thing to do. Ross picked up the photo of himself and Sarah, studying it. "Get me Sarah on the phone," he said finally. "And someone find out if that clinic in Tanzania needs any new equipment." The tension in the room broke like a fever. As Ross's assistant hurried to make the call, Angelina caught Diana's eye and nodded slightly. They had done it, not by destroying their opponent, but by helping him find a better way forward. But as they prepared to leave, Margaret's voice stopped them. "Angelina, wait." She stepped forward, her expression troubled. "I owe you an apology. I forgot something important about being a lawyer, something you just reminded me of." "What's that?" "That sometimes the best way to serve our clients is to help them be their better selves." Behind them, Ross's voice floated from his desk. "Sarah?" "Yes, it's Dad. I saw the work you're doing there. I'd like to help if you'll let me." As they walked out of the office, Angelina reflected that some threads, once torn, could be rewoven into something even stronger than before. But the story wasn't quite over, there was still one more piece to fall into place. 3 months later, Angelina stood on a makeshift stage in Tanzania, watching as Carlton Ross awkwardly wielded an oversized pair of scissors at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The new wing of the medical clinic gleamed in the African sun, its walls freshly painted and equipment still wrapped in protective covering. Sarah Ross stood beside her father, their matching smiles suggesting that some wounds truly could heal. "Not bad for 3 months' work," Diana Chin murmured beside her. "From enemies to partners in humanitarian aid. I don't think even I expected it to work out quite this well." The transformation had been remarkable. Once Ross committed to the partnership, he threw himself into it with the same intensity he'd once directed at destroying the foundation. His media empire now regularly featured stories about humanitarian work worldwide, not just from the Jolie Foundation but from countless smaller organizations doing vital work in forgotten corners of the globe. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ross addressed the gathered crowd, his voice carrying the same authority it always had, but tempered now with something new, humility. "Today marks not just the opening of a new medical facility, but the beginning of a new approach to humanitarian aid. By combining the operational excellence of the Jolie Foundation with Ross Media's resources and reach, we're creating a model that can be replicated around the world." Sarah beamed at her father, and Angelina caught the moment his voice softened as their eyes met. Some victories, she reflected, were worth far more than simply winning a legal battle. A familiar flash of red caught her eye. Margaret Thorne stood at the edge of the crowd, looking somewhat out of place in her designer suit. She'd resigned from Ross Media 2 weeks after the confrontation in Ross's office, citing a need to reassess her priorities. Today was the first time Angelina had seen her since then. As Ross finished his speech and the crowd began to disperse, Margaret made her way over. "Hello, Angie," she said softly. "Diana." "Margaret." Angelina studied her former attorney's face. "I didn't expect to see you here. I almost didn't come." Margaret glanced around at the clinic, the staff, the children playing in the shade of a large acacia tree. "But I needed to see it for myself. To understand what you were trying to tell me all along." "And?" Diana prompted gently. "And I've been thinking about making a change." Margaret squared her shoulders. "I'm considering starting a new practice. Pro bono work for humanitarian organizations. Teaching them how to protect themselves legally while staying true to their missions." She paused. "I don't suppose either of you would be willing to serve as references?" Before Angelina could respond, Maddox appeared with an urgent expression. "Mom, you need to see this." He held up his tablet, displaying a news alert. A major crisis had erupted in Southeast Asia, flooding had displaced thousands, and more storms were approaching. "We'll need to coordinate with local authorities," Angelina began, but Ross was already striding over, phone in hand. My teams in the region are ready to provide media coverage, he said. Sarah, didn't you mention that doctor you worked with in Malaysia? Dr. Chen? Sarah was already pulling up contacts on her phone. She runs a network of mobile medical units. They could be there in hours if we can provide transportation. I can help with the legal clearances for cross-border aid, Margaret offered. When everyone turned to look at her, she added, pro bono, of course. Diana smiled. I think we just witnessed the birth of your new humanitarian law practice, Margaret. As the group huddled together, planning their response to the crisis, Angelina felt a profound sense of rightness. This was how it should be, former adversaries working together, each contributing their unique strengths to a common cause. Later that evening, as the African sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, Angelina found a quiet moment to stand alone outside the clinic. A young mother passed by, carrying a healthy baby who had been born in the new maternity ward just days ago. The woman smiled in recognition and gratitude. Penny for your thoughts? Diana joined her, offering a cup of coffee. I was just thinking about something you said when we first met, Angelina replied. About how people who want to change the world usually believe they're the heroes of their own stories. Ah, yes. And maybe that's the key. Not proving who's the hero and who's the villain, but helping everyone find the hero in themselves. She watched as Ross and Sarah walked the clinic grounds together, pointing out features of the new building to Margaret, who was taking notes with her usual thoroughness. Even if they've lost their way for a while. Speaking of heroes, Diana nodded toward the clinic entrance, where Maddox was deep in conversation with one of the local doctors. Your son tells me he's reconsidering corporate law in favor of international humanitarian law. Angelina smiled. Following in your footsteps instead of Margaret's original path. The world needs all kinds of lawyers, Diana mused. But it especially needs ones who remember that the law should serve humanity, not the other way around. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky as the day's events wound down. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the crisis in Southeast Asia, ongoing projects in a dozen countries, and the constant work of maintaining the delicate balance of their new partnerships. But tonight, in this moment, Angelina could appreciate how a conflict that had threatened to destroy everything had instead created something stronger. Trust, once torn, could indeed be rewoven. Sometimes the new pattern was even more beautiful than the original, not despite its breaks and mends, but because of them. Every scar told a story of healing, of choosing a harder path, of finding light in unexpected places. As if reading her thoughts, Diana raised her coffee cup in a small toast. To torn threads, she said softly. Angelina raised her own cup. And to trust rewoven. Behind them, the new clinic hummed with life and purpose, a testament to what could be accomplished when people chose to build rather than destroy. In the end, that was the real victory, not the battle won, but the peace that followed, stronger for having been tested, more precious for having been chosen. The African night deepened, stars multiplying across the vast sky, each one a point of light in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, in this moment, all was well. The threads of trust, once torn, had been rewoven into something new and strong and beautiful. And somewhere in the tapestry of it all was a lesson worth remembering, that the greatest victories often come not from destroying our opponents, but from helping them find their way back to their better selves.
Tell us in the comments what part of this story impressed you the most. If you liked it, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next videos. See you in the world of incredible events.